Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy webinar. I'm Dr. Alex Katehakis, and today is Monday, October 2nd. It's a beautiful fall day here in Los Angeles, and I hope that all of you are gearing up for the coziness that fall often brings us. Our topic today is erotic intimacy, which I'm very excited to talk about today. And you'll note that erotic intimacy in the book is actually the entry for October 4th. But because we've recorded so many of these topics now, we're starting to move around the calendar a little bit so that you're not confused. That is the October 4th entry. A few things before we start as usual. I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box only, and any outgoing messages for you, whether they're links or information about Center for Healthy Sex or how you can reach an intake counselor, will be in the chat box. So please do not type your questions into the chat box, type them into the Q&A box, and then I'll answer them as we go along. That way we can have a dialogue. And also leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon for Mirror of Intimacy. Let us know what you love about the book, how you use the book, who you share the book with. We very much appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below so you never have to miss a post. You can also keep up with what we're doing at Center for Healthy Sex by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. Our quote for today is from Richard Bach, and he writes, "The opposite of loneliness is not togetherness, it is intimacy." And I think that's a beautiful statement because we can be in a relationship or living in a home with another person, and just because we're in the same space does not mean we're together. And we can feel very lonely in a relationship. In fact, many songs are written about this phenomenon, that there's a deep loneliness when we are in relationship with someone and we're disconnected from them. It's almost more painful than just quietly being alone. But it's really intimacy that creates that togetherness. And I want to talk a lot today about what intimacy is and what it isn't. So I think of intimacy as the space between two people. And these are two people who share familiarity and closeness. Their lives are intimately bound. So this can be a two-person relationship, a three-person relationship. It can also be a family. But our lives are sort of inextricably bound together with each other. And an atmosphere that is vital, vibrant, these are vitality states, alive states, will weave these connections together. So there is a mutual understanding and a sense that the other person really perceives you and knows you the way nobody else does, not because you're just living under the same roof, but because of your curiosity about that person, because the questions that you ask that person, because of how well you know that person. And a lot of times people will say they know the other, but they don't really. They make assumptions, they fill in the blanks. It's sort of the adage with couples that have been together for a long time where one person will say, well, I already know what he or she is going to say. But the truth is you don't, because we are changing constantly and our partners are changing constantly. So the more curious we are about our perceptions of them, how we see them, their beauty, their hilarity, their goofiness, their sexiness, all of it, the more deeply intimate we are actually connected with them. And it connects us to our very own self in some way. So these ingredients that I'm talking about, this connection, mutual understanding, a sense that that person perceives you and gets you the way nobody else does, they make an incredible cocktail out of which love and eroticism can emerge. Because the more we are curious about the other, the more compassion we have for the other person, the more deeply we can love them, and the more erotic our sexuality can be, because it's not just stale or known or rote or expected. Some of the most private and personal space that can occur with a lover during sex, or can occur with a lover during sex. It can also occur in a restaurant or a walk along the beach or a lake or around your neighborhood. So I want you to take a moment right now and ask yourself, how do you make yourself known? How do you make yourself known to the person or persons that you are closest to? What sort of things do you reveal about yourself? What kind of questions do you ask the other so that you can better know them? Or are you just going through the motions of talking and not listening? And listening is a big component to this because many people don't listen well, and listening is a skill, and it's an intimate skill where we're not just looking at the person in somewhat of a daze or half attention. We're actually really looking. And when you're looking, what are you seeing? The shape of that person's ears, the color of their eyes, the texture of their skin, the way their lips are shaped or move, and also what are you actually hearing when they're talking? Are you hearing beyond the words and into the affective state of that person, how they're feeling? Are you feeling with them? Are you curious about their experience? Or is your anxiety going up? Are you busy formulating your response to that person, or wanting to relate to what they're saying so anxiously or exuberantly that it all becomes about you now and not about what they're saying? So what do you do to listen and to know? And then what are the ways that you make yourself known? And maybe just take a moment to think about that, or to jot that down. And think about this idea that intimacy really, again, that funny little ditty of "into me see," reveals our innermost self, our inner sanctum, where we ourselves often discover ourselves not only in communion with another, but with ourselves in quiet, in meditation, in contact with our body. If you sit in meditation, or you take a moment that's maybe not a formal meditation, and just close your eyes and check in with your body and ask your body, what is it saying today? Where are you feeling tension or tightness or loneliness or sadness or excitement because something is on the horizon? And what does that physical state say to you? How is it informing you? We will start to discover ourselves, our innermost self, which changes day to day, month to month, year to year. Speaking of which, year to year, I can hardly believe that it's fall and we know what's happening in the next 3 months, that this year is going to be over in a snap. So if the year's over in a snap, what happened to you this last year? What experiences did you have? What changes did you make? How much are you in touch with the impact of those changes on your psyche, on your emotions, on your physical body? And do you attend to those, or do you just blaze past them? Because if you yourself don't know and honor the changes that you're going through, the season that you are in right now, emotionally, physically, psychologically, sexually, then you can't possibly reveal these to someone else. And really, the most revelatory thing we can do with another is to share these fears, these vulnerabilities, these changes in conversation. That if more people talk to each other in relationship, like really talk to each other about their deepest, darkest pains and secrets and fears and awkwardness, then we would see a big difference in the divorce rate. We would see a very big difference in people's sexual connections as well. So how many times have you had a revelation about yourself or your sexuality while having sex? Or learned about an essential value that you hold while in a deep conversation with somebody you love? And afterwards or during, have you revealed that to your partner? Now, sometimes if you have a revelation about your sexuality while having sex, typically we're not going to stop the sexual activity to start talking about our revelation. But after sex, in what's called pillow talk, do you share what just happened to you with your partner? Because the left brain loves to make meaning of experience. And so a parallel to this process is psychotherapy. So you may have this kind of amazing emotional experience in therapy where you are deep down into the past, into your childhood, into your body, into your trauma, if you will. And you're having a moment where you don't really know what's going on, but something is shifting. Maybe you're crying. Maybe you're deeply scared or sad or angry. And you don't really know what just happened until you come out of that state, because that is a different self state. It's a shifted state of consciousness. And it's when you're out of it that you and your therapist talk about what just happened there. What was my experience? What does that mean to me? Did I know that before? Is this a different iteration of knowing or a deeper experience of that knowing? So you process what just happened. And those are two separate processes. One of them is happening internally, but it's happening in relationship with the therapist. And the other becomes a left brain cognitive understanding of what just happened, because we love to know what just happened. And so likewise in sex, if you have an experience during sex, a revelation about yourself, about what you like or what you don't like, or something that maybe happened in your past, and you're connecting it to you and your partner, please make sure that you share that with your partner afterwards. Have a conversation about it so that you both understand you better and your partner can understand themselves better in relation to you and your sexuality and your lovemaking process. So don't be stingy about what's going on with you. Share it, make yourself vulnerable, because intimacy means to make known, but it teaches us about ourselves as well as the other. So think about that intimacy means to make known. Someone posted a question in the Q&A box, and the question is about getting a copy of the webinar. Well, all of our webinars are on our YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com and you type in Center for Healthy Sex, there you'll find our YouTube channel and all of our videos from the past, I want to say 100 years, but probably at least the past 15 years, let's say 2010. You will find countless videos about many, many experts from all over the country that are sexuality experts. And these videos, I believe, began around 2014. So you'll be able to find all of the Mirror of Intimacy entries to date there as well. So if intimacy means to make known, that means it also teaches us about ourselves and about the other person. So think about that. How much do you announce yourself? How much do you talk about what's really going on with you? And not in a kind of neurotic, self-centered way. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when something is at issue, let's say with you and your partner. Let's say it's finances, it's money. And you're feeling like there's a misunderstanding or a disconnection. The first step is to sit down and journal about, what does money mean to you? What were the messages you got about money growing up? How did you learn to handle money based on the way your parents behaved with it? Were they immature with money, mature with money? Did they gamble it away? Did they save so much of it, but you lived in, not poverty, but didn't have a lot because they were so scared of spending it? All of that informs who we are, just as our sexual messages inform who we are. So once you get clear about things, and every time you journal, I promise you some new little seed will pop up. Then you can sit down with your partner and say, I want to have a conversation about money, and give yourselves like 2 hours. Don't think you're going to do this in 15 minutes. And start by letting your partner know what your issues are about money, where you have scarcity issues, where you might overspend, where you are confused about how to save or what to earmark for vacation, so that the two of you are on the same side against the problem as opposed to making each other the problem. And in that, we start to understand each other better. We start to make ourselves known, and we're learning about the other, and we stop hiding from ourselves. And we begin to tell the truth about who we are because we're making ourselves vulnerable. We're looking into the depths of our own soul, our own psyche, and then we are offering it to our partners. It's a shared experience. And you want to do this with a partner who can meet you in kind, not someone who is going to roll their eyes or make fun of you or say, this is ridiculous. I guess I would be making fun of you, but someone who can hold a space for that kind of vulnerability and tenderness, who really wants to know these things about you, as opposed to judging them. Because if we feel judged, our defenses go up. We're not available to ourselves, let alone someone else. And then we cannot create intimacy. We can have sex, but we can't create intimacy at all. And then sex becomes used as a tool, as a way to service each other, or weaponized in some way. But it is not a conversation. And when you're having conversations that are open and vulnerable and revealing, then sex becomes a very different kind of conversation. It becomes a conversation between bodies, between brains, between souls and the universe, if you will, that is unspoken and known by the lovers. But when you've got all this debris in the way, and you don't trust your partner, and you are suspicious, and you don't really reveal yourself to yourself, the sex is not going to be that great. So someone has a question saying, I've been in recovery for a year. Congratulations. In recovery, my wife and I had some great connection and discovered erotic sex, but we don't have pillow talk. It seems like outside of sex, there's no conversation of it. We don't speak about it. She says, I always have sex on my mind. How can I make it a normal conversation? Well, I think, first of all, by sharing with her that when you have sex on your mind, it's not about getting off or penetrating her or being, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of leering towards her, that you want to talk about your sexuality, which is very different. And you want to have a conversation with her. And is she willing to go for a walk with you and talk about sex, about what you both like, what you love about each other, what feels good, what could be more enticing with each other? And is she open to talking about it? So that's the first conversation, is can we talk about our talking? And that I don't have an agenda to have more sex with you. I just want to know you more deeply. I'm curious about your experience. I'm curious about how I can be a better lover for you. So that would be my best thinking about this, not knowing either one of you. My partner does not enjoy foreplay or aftercare, and this makes me feel distance from him when being intimate. So I think you mean when having sex. I think in order to be intimate, you have to have intimate conversations. So that is a conversation for you and your partner to talk about what happens to him or her during foreplay and aftercare, and what does that mean to you? Maybe you might want to do some writing about why those two parts of sexuality are important to you. And we could relate this to fast food versus fine dining. If you go to fast food, you just grab the hamburger and gobble it down. If you go to a 4 or 5 course meal, you're savoring every beautiful dish that arrives. Let's say the salad arrives, or the appetizer arrives first, and you're both tasting this wonderful concoction and making orgasmic sounds from your mouth about how delicious it is. And you don't really have to talk about it and pick it apart. You're just having the shared experience of how delectable it tastes in your mouth, how full it feels in the mouth. And then you ooh and ah over the beauty of the salad that arrives next. And maybe you share that, or you have an experience with it. And so the meal goes. So you can use that as a metaphor for how to talk about, the different courses of sex also, and how sometimes people who just want to jump straight to penetrative sex are really trying to manage their anxiety about their self-consciousness, about not feeling good enough or feeling awkward or not feeling, attractive or sexy or knowing what they're doing. So they figure if they can just get the sex over with and get it done, then they've managed their anxiety. And that is not a fun place to be on the receiving end of, that's for sure. And for the person who's anxious, it's not fun for them either. They know that they're missing something. They're afraid to find out what it is they're missing or to have a different experience. So see if there's a way that you can make an invitation to your partner to have a different kind of sex, a slower sex. The kind of openness that I'm talking about can be scary because there's the possibility that we'll discover something about ourselves that we think is distorted or unsavory or out of sync with who we think we are, and that we don't want to look into the corners of our psyches in that way. But I can pretty much promise you that whatever you learn about yourself or find in those inner recesses of your mind are not that distorted. And I've talked about this before, and I don't want to sound like I am banging the drum or purporting this by any means, but I wrote an article about sex and play versus preying, preying, that which is predatory. And what I found, because I did a workshop, and the workshop asked the participants, there were about 20 women, to write on index cards what their most secret sexual fantasy was. And the majority of them were about submission. Some of them were about rape. So they were about being dominated or overpowered, typically by a male for those that were heterosexual. And I started to look at that and I thought, why is it that this is the predominant fantasy? So when I looked at the literature, what I saw was that this rape domination fantasy predominated with women between the ages of 22 and 40. And when I thought about romance novels, I thought, oh, that is the prevailing theme in romance novels. And so when we can admit those things to ourselves, we learn about our sexuality, but it does not mean that any one of those women, no female you would ask anywhere on the planet would tell you that she wants to be raped, ever. I'm convinced of that. And that may be a broad statement, but I don't think so. I'm going to stand by it as taking a stand on that. So when we discover things about ourselves that we like sexually that might be a little kinky or what is considered perverse or taboo, we should be curious about that and not shut the door or slam the door and say, I'm perverted, I'm dirty, I don't ever want anybody to know about this. I think that's an invitation for you to get very curious about your sexuality, to lean into that. What does it mean for you to be submissive or dominant? If we just use those sort of fetishes as an example, what does it say about you if you submit? Does that mean you're weak? Does that mean that you aren't going to function well in your life? Does that mean you'll be taken advantage of all the time? And if you're dominant, what does that mean to me? Does it to you? Does that mean you're a bully, or that if you're female, you're quote a bitch, or that you're going to be sort of domineering in your life and taking over and controlling, and people aren't going to like you? So these are shadow sides of ourselves, of even the masculine and the feminine, what Jung called the anima and the animus. And for us to play with those polarities, to get curious about the corners of our psyches, has us starting to fill out our sexuality in more robust ways so that we're less limited sexually. Because if we just do what we are told is okay based on our gender descriptions and roles, and we stay within that little band, sex is going to get very boring very quickly. And when you start to think of these as energies, the masculine and the feminine, the dominant, the submissive, the beautiful, the ugly, then you'll start to see that your psyche is way more elastic than you thought it was, and that there's nothing wrong with you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you, that you are an erotic being and an erotic creature, which all of us are. We are only limited by our imagination. So I want you to think about what it means to have the courage to be vulnerable in the way I'm talking about. And that courage is a requisite for this most intimate of all tasks. When we're willing to venture into the depths of the unknown, and the faith that we'll emerge changed for the better, that is a definition of courage. And when you think about every hero's journey you've ever seen, whether it's Harry Potter, because I was just seeing last week that Michael Gambon, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, passed away last week. He was the lovable Dumbledore. So whether it's that hero's journey or something from Star Wars or from Lord of the Rings or any other, great tale, you will see that courage was what was required of all of those characters to venture into the unknown. And they had faith that something was going to change, that they were going to emerge changed and for the better. And they did. And it wasn't without scars. It wasn't without harrowing experiences. But isn't that a metaphor for life? That if we don't risk, we don't change. We stay very small. And that's evidenced by people that are agoraphobic, who don't leave their homes, or who are hoarders who wall themselves in with papers and magazines and stuff, so they can barely budge in their own homes. All of that is enormous fear, dissociated fear, terror of the world. And that is the opposite of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the courage it takes to be vulnerable, to really get naked. Not physically naked, but emotionally naked, so that you can learn about yourself and who you are and what you want and what you like and what kind of life you want to live. So I want to challenge you to strip down to your nakedness and bear the raw truth of who you are. And think about that statement. Really strip down. Bear the raw truth of who you are, and don't be surprised if what you find in that state is that you connect to yourself, that you really connect to yourself, to your lover, to the divine in a spiritual way, to all these unimaginable ways. And one of the best ways to do this is through journaling. And I really want you to consider that also, that you journal in a way where you're getting to the truth, where you are willing to reveal yourself to yourself in the rawest, most vulnerable way. So don't worry about writing in the margins. Don't worry about spelling, spacing, grammar, anything along those lines. Just forget about all of that. If you're writing longhand, let yourself just write longhand. If you're writing on a computer, just type away, forget about the space bar and forget about punctuation marks. And just write and ask yourself if what you're writing is really true. Is the statement true that you just made, or is there something underneath that statement of what you just said? And what is the deeper truth that you're looking for? So it might be something like, I'm miserable in my sex life. And I would ask you to write about all the misery that you have about your sex life, all the things that you hate about it, why it's wrong, why it sucks, why it's the worst sex life in the world. And then once you get past that narrative, I want you to drill down deeper and ask yourself, what is my part in why this is so miserable? Where am I lying to myself? What am I doing that's not really true? I had a client many, many years ago who was having sex with her husband, and she said she enjoyed it, but when it came right down to it, she didn't, because she wasn't really ready before he penetrated her. She wasn't really lubricating. And yet she was leapfrogging that to accommodate him because she wanted him to want her. So the only person violating her in that moment was her. She wasn't being honest with herself and what she needed and slowing the sex down or buying a lubricant or talking to him about what was really going on. And he was not an unreasonable human being. He would have stayed in that conversation with her. So when you ask yourself, what is my part in my misery? What am I doing to co-create this? Then you start to see that you are not a victim in your life anymore. You're a volunteer, as they say in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, that you are a volunteer. This woman was a volunteer to her discomfort. She wasn't miserable, but it was uncomfortable. And why was she doing that? Well, because she said she loved him. But what was really underneath that was her lifelong history of people pleasing. And when we get to those issues of my people pleasing, my perfectionism, my worrying about what my partner thinks about me, blah, 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 all of that self-consciousness, which is born of shame, then we get down to the kernel of it, which is I'm really afraid to be that vulnerable. I'm afraid to really show my partner my sexuality or my pleasure or my erotic self because it's a lot of power and a lot of energy. So I'm going to just keep it small, and then I'm going to have discomfort or pain and be miserable. So look for the deeper truths in this journaling process. Really dig deeply about what is scaring you, where you're most vulnerable, and don't be surprised if this kind of raw exposure of yourself to yourself doesn't take you to some very deep hurts in childhood, whether it's with your family of origin and your parents, or bullying, or a boyfriend who treated you poorly in, when you were 16 years old. All of your history lives in your body. It lives in your psyche. It lives in your emotions. And if you don't express it, it's going to go somewhere. So let it out as completely and fully as you can. Strip down to your nakedness and bear the raw truth of who you are. That is a courageous act to yourself. And then, and only then, will you really start to know who you are and feel freer sexually and become your best sexual partner, right? Your best lover will be yourself, because then you can communicate these things to your partner. So if we look at today's daily sex acts, the first one suggests that you expose your true self to yourself, which is what I was just talking about. And think about a part of you that feels stuck or scared. Think about a part of you that feels stuck or scared. And if you were to close your eyes right now and locate that feeling in your body, where in your body do you feel stuck or scared? Is it in your legs? Is it in your gut? Do you have tension in your low back, your upper back, your neck or shoulders? Locate that feeling in your body and dive deeply into that feeling. What is that feeling saying? What arises for you in this moment? I am scared. I am moving too quickly through the world. I'm trying to get way too much done. I have to give up my perfectionism because it's strangling me. I have to stop caretaking to every single family member in my life because I'm dying underneath the weight of all that. So what is your body saying? And then write down your experience. Free associate that experience when we get off this call. Write down what comes up for you, what's really, really true, and speak the unspeakable. And when you're done with that writing, shred it. Delete. Don't save any of it. It's all just garbage lodged in your body, mind, brain. So get rid of it. Throw it away. There's no need to go back and read it. If there are a few little gems of truth that you want to pluck out, fine, but don't labor over what you've written. And certainly destroy it so that nobody else reads it, because it's only one bit of the truth for you. And then when you're clear about what that kernel of truth is, share your deepest, darkest secrets with your lover. Take off your armor. Stop worrying about looking good. Dare to expose your truth. And think about that. Make an appointment to meet with your husband, wife, lover, and say, I want to talk. There are things I really need to share with you about myself. I just learned something about myself. I need you to know. Because we all need a witness. We all need that kind of validation and to be heard. And then from this place of vulnerability, open your heart to love and to be loved, because you are lovable just as you are. So if anybody has any questions, now would be time to type them into the Q&A box. You've been a very quiet group today. Maybe that's because I was talking so much. Could be. All right. Well, I would suggest that you save your questions for your journaling, that you pose those questions to yourself, to your own inner self, to your own intuition, your higher self, the God and goddess in you, in small quotation marks or small letters, the all-knowing you. So I wish you all a very beautiful October. October is such a fun month because of pumpkins and because of Halloween, which happens to be one of my favorite holidays. I've loved it since I was a child. I know for others it can be scary or traumatizing or against perhaps your spiritual beliefs. For you, I hope you have a beautiful month anyway. And I look forward to talking to all of you in November. So take good care. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.